Honored to represent President Obama in our
immense pride, and I feel very honored.
This program was made possible by Southern African Community USA, SACU, T&T Design Studio, freelance graphic design, and Cheza Dance. And you're watching Southern African Connection.
I am Ingles.
I'm Thoko Kachipande.
And I'm Gaynor Khan.
Also with us in the studio today, we have Sitinga Kachipande, a scholar in African Studies from Virginia Tech University. Sitinga, welcome to Southern African Connection.
Thank you, Gil.
All right. On today's edition, we focused on the life of Nelson Mandela. We're going to discuss his life, the meaning of his life, and what he actually meant to many of the people in the African continent. His early history and background, and also his education, his revolutionary background, his statesmanship, and also his family life. So, are you guys ready?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right, Sitinga, so you are the expert on African studies.
Yes, well, there are a few people who don't know who Nelson Mandela is. He's been an inspiration to a lot of people, not only in his home country of South Africa, but in neighboring African countries as well, such as Malawi, Angola, where a lot of people in those countries helped out with the anti-apartheid movement. And even in the United States here, the anti-apartheid movement was big here. A lot of people from Washington, D.C. to California got involved in the anti-apartheid struggle from this end as well. So his life has meant a lot to so many people in the world, and I'm glad that we're here today to talk about it.
Right, but I mean, of course, it would just be fair that before we actually start talking about Nelson Mandela, we get to know a little bit about you, right? What do you guys think?
Yes, it sounds good.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about you.
Okay. Well, my background, I'm originally from Malawi.
Okay.
I did grow up in South Africa. I lived there for 6 years during the apartheid period. So I was there during the time when apartheid was happening in South Africa. And
so you went through the struggle.
And yes, I did go through the struggle. Well, not personally. I mean, I was still in high school during that time. However, when I went to South Africa, it was the time when apartheid was still there. And at that time, the buses were segregated, the neighborhoods were segregated.
The school system was
segregated,
wow.
As well as many other spheres of public life. And so I saw firsthand the effects that apartheid had on South Africans.
Yes.
Well, I think that we have to remember that Nelson Mandela, he was part of a movement. And so when he was born, there were people who came before him and people who moved with him in order to get apartheid dismantled. As far as his background, he did come from, I'd say, royalty in his...
His father was a chief. Mm-hmm. He was born in a village called Kunu, Transkei. And when his father passed away, he went to Johannesburg to further his education. So when he got to Johannesburg, that's where he saw that how people were treated and from the apartheid. So that's when he decided that he needed to make a change.
And he was inspired to become a lawyer, isn't that correct?
Correct.
Because that's what he was by trade, right? A lawyer.
Yes,
okay.
He was.
So to us, to most of us, we basically know him as that individual that has gotten arrested, went into jail, sat in jail for several years, right? And later on came out to become president. So I'm sure that he had done something prior to being arrested that probably triggered that revolutionary instinct on him. Do you guys by any chance know what it is? Do we have an idea of what that may be?
Well, I think as Gaynor explained, when he moved to the bigger cities and saw how people were being treated, that's something that people go through every day of your life. You couldn't escape apartheid for the most part, and so seeing how people were treated is a big trigger for somebody to become involved in the anti-apartheid struggle. And he joined, initially he wasn't always a member of the ANC. When he went there, he went for other reasons. But then he got himself involved in the ANC Youth League and was one of the founders of that, and slowly became somebody who was more prominent in the movement.
Now, as a family man, this man was the father of several. Do we know how many children he had, or how many grandchildren?
I mean, I know he had 2 children with his first wife, because remember, he was married more than once.
Right. I think he was married 3 times.
3 times?
And I remember hearing that his first wife was Walter Sisulu's cousin.
Yes, yes.
Right. So
his third wife, he married when he was 80 years old. Graça Machel was the third wife, so he had the 2 wives while he, was Nelson Mandela.
Okay. Now, this is real great conversation, but unfortunately we have to take a very quick break, so we'll be back in the next few minutes. Thank you.
South Africa gained its freedom from apartheid on April 27, 1994. For yearly Community Freedom Day celebrations in the USA, please visit our website at www.southernafricanconnection.com.
And thank you for staying with us. We will continue now our discussion of the life and meaning of Nelson Mandela. With us we have Sitinga Kachipande, who is one of the experts of African Studies. Now, let's talk about the first time you heard about Nelson Mandela. What exactly was it?
Well, the first time that I heard about Nelson Mandela was when we were planning to move to South Africa from the United States. That was the first time I really heard about apartheid and what was going on. So when we moved to South Africa, I started to hear more about what was happening with the country and about Nelson Mandela and who he was, and that he was in jail at that time.
Yeah, I don't think I can say I remember when I first heard about him, but I do know that growing up, I always heard about Nelson Mandela, mostly through music, because that was one of the ways that the movement carried itself. Exactly. And there's this one song, Free Nelson Mandela. Exactly. I want to see him walking hand in hand with Winnie Mandela. I know, I'm sure a lot of people remember that, and I just remember growing up listening to musicals and listening to those kinds of songs. So yeah, he's definitely been a part of life.
Yeah, I believe the continent really created a lot of songs to support this cause and to kind of keep on going, because that's also one of the experiences that I've had, was basically through his music. Now, on some of apartheid experiences and that he kind of broke down for the young generation, if there was one single lesson that you think that the young generation would get from Nelson Mandela, what do you think it would be?
Education.
Education.
Because education was big for Nelson Mandela, and he always encouraged the youth to go ahead and get your education, because he believed knowledge was power, and nobody can take that away from you.
I think for me it would be not to fight hate with hate. I think that he went through so much and had sacrificed so much and had so much taken away from him, but he didn't fight back that racism with his own type of racism. It was very humble and forgiving.
Actually, that was the same point that I would have made. It's the power of an individual to forgive. I mean, 27 years is a long time to be in jail, and it takes a certain type of character to be able to forgive after that long.
Now, one of the things that we have all, I'm sure that you guys have also probably seen that movie, Mandela, right?
The Long Walk to Freedom?
Right.
Yes.
One of the things that gets portrayed in that movie that kind of blew my mind a little bit was the fact that, they made it seem like the whole thing was somewhat coordinated, like his release and everything else. Do you guys really think that the movie was portraying the truth, or it was simply, a movie thing, or a producer's thing to make the movie more interesting?
I don't know. I think that it does take a lot of negotiation. I think things don't happen overnight, so it was probably pretty accurate. I remember one writer who had been part of the group speaking, And one of the lines that he said that stuck to me was, they were having talks about having talks about having talks. So I think that's really how it happened. You know, it didn't happen overnight.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, one of the most interesting things is this, okay? His worst enemy, I guess, ends up becoming one of his best friends to the end of his life. Him and F.W. de Klerk, okay? These are individuals who at one point couldn't even get along. What do you guys think about that? What's your take on that?
I'm not sure if it was his best friend, but I think that they won the Nobel Peace Prize together, which
they did do that, yeah.
which says something about both men.
Right.
Yes. And I think also they were doing what they were doing for the good of for the greater good, for the good of the country, and not thinking about themselves as individuals. As we all know, South Africa at that time, they were under economic sanctions, and the things were tightening up for South Africa. So part of it was the economic push, the political isolation, and I think all that plays a role in how they decided to move ahead.
Right.
I think also when he was in prison, he had a lot of time to think, because when he got into prison, he had a lot of anger and hatred, and he still had that inside of him. But when he was in prison, he actually learned how to speak Afrikaans, which was F.W. de Klerk's language. So what he did was he tried to teach himself the history of the Afrikaner. So he taught himself how to speak his oppressors' language, so that he can communicate with them, and that's how he kind of like smooth talked, and how things happened, how they became friends.
Now, do we all think that this is probably a lesson for several African leaders, especially those that go through struggle of power, to at some point really having to sit down, understand your opposition, not to say enemy, and then be able to negotiate with them at the same level or in the same table as a friend?
Yeah, I think definitely for any leader, I think it's a very important point. And just by you saying that, to look at them as their opposition or not enemy, I think that's a very important part of humanity. And unfortunately, a lot of leaders don't see things that way.
Right. And now, and I post this that way, Nelson Mandela, let's say, had not given power after becoming president, would South Africa probably go through another case of maybe a civil war or anything of that sort?
You mean having stepped down?
Right, and did not step down when he stepped down and given the presidency to someone else.
I'm not sure if it would have led to a civil war, but I definitely think that his stepping down set the standard for what South African leadership is like today. Because if he had not stepped down, then the next person would have probably found it much harder to do so. And South Africa has gone through a number of presidents since him.
Right.
We just actually went through our election again with Jacob Zuma, that became in his second term president. But I think when Nelson Mandela he wanted to give other leaders the chance. He was that humble man. He was not about himself, he didn't show pride. He didn't show like, oh, I did it. He stepped down because he wanted to give somebody else a chance.
Right, I mean, one of the quotes that I do remember from him in pretty much most of his interviews was always that I didn't do it, the movement did it. He always referred to it as the movement doing it, and that shows a humble man, a man who's actually accomplished, because when you're that comfortable with what you have accomplished, you can give credit to whoever you want, because no one can actually take your credit away. But he definitely did set the standard, not only for South Africa. Now, on current South Africa, okay, are they still having issues of racism, or have these issues all gone away once apartheid totally disappeared?
I would like to see a country that has no racism.
That's true.
Right.
Because I think we can't say that apartheid has completely disappeared. It's only been a short time. 20 years is not a long time for any country to completely heal Maybe Gaynor, you can speak to that as well. Too.
No, I don't think people say apartheid is over, but as far as racism, it's still there. I think what happened in apartheid was too brutal for people to forget. You know, they should forget, because I mean, Nelson Mandela was you know, big on forgiving, and I think what the country should do is just forgive and forget. But I don't think they'll forget.
Because even here in the United States, the civil rights movement was ended in the 1960s, but we're still seeing the effects of that today. And it's been 50 years.
Yes.
And so we can't expect South Africa to have completely changed in less time.
And when you think of the amount of years that they took to actually develop apartheid and to put in a system, I mean, that took, I don't know how many years and years. So why should we expect 20 years?
Right, but it's getting better. It's getting better. It's getting there.
Okay, now what about the effect of apartheid on reverse racism? Is that something that now South Africa is also starting to experience?
Reverse racism?
In which blacks may not want to really associate with other races during specific situations. Is that something that...
You know, I have to say, when I've gone back to South Africa, I left right after Nelson Mandela was released and right before the first free democratic election. And I didn't go back until a number of years later. And I have to say, when I went back, I know it's a bit of a cliche to say a rainbow nation, but I did see South Africans embracing themselves. It really, I think that they're a very positive group of people that really just want to present their country as this country that's has so many people of so many backgrounds. So I don't know if they're people that are looking at it that way. I'm sure there's some. There are always some.
There are always exceptions.
Yeah, but I just felt the love of everybody and just like the joy that people had of, you know, looking at their country as this, you know, rainbow nation.
Right.
That's what I remember about South Africa.
Because even during the World Cup, we can see that the country was really unified and united.
It was one.
Oh, that rugby game, you know, that's something that always stands out.
Monumental also. That was something very monumental for him, right? Because that's when he actually got a chance to unify the country, I would say, at the sports
the Afrikaner was very worried when Nelson Mandela became president, and they thought, like, what's going to happen to us? What's going to happen to us? You know, because they were in rule of the Afrikaner. But now, like Nelson Mandela, like, it was unified, you know, and they didn't know what was going to happen. So what he did was he used rugby because it was the white man's sport. So he used that to unite everybody, you know, black and white and Indians and colored.
Right. Okay, now rugby is now a sport that all South Africans play and very proudly treat as their own sport, correct?
Right.
Right, so it's no longer one of those Class A for only specific...
Yeah,
it was like non-whites are not allowed to play.
The rest played soccer, and then
so
rugby was for others.
Right, so his mission was accomplished, and this is definitely, I mean, a monumental man. And due to that, I mean, we do have several clips of the unveiling of his statue. I think that's why he's so deserving of actually having a statue right here in the capital of the United States, in Washington, D.C., at the embassy, in the same grounds where they have initially started the anti-apartheid movement here in the United States, where they had arrested several Americans. They also have basically raised a statue for Nelson Mandela. So let's take a look at those clips and we'll be right back.
I too am proud as a representative of the movement of our people, the African National Congress, in which former President Mandela served as a loyal cadre, as a young man, as a leader and inspiration, which he continues to be to this day. It is an equally proud moment for me to stand before such an august audience as this one that played a significant role in the struggle against apartheid. It is the support of the mighty anti-apartheid movement that eventually saw us attain our freedom and democracy, with Tata Nelson Mandela becoming the first democratically elected South African president in 1994.
Can you just give me one word that would describe today, please?
I'm filled with immense pride, and I feel very honored by today's events.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome to Washington, D.C. Congratulations and best wishes to you over there.
Thank you for the support.
Thank you.
Here we are at one of the greatest events that Africa has had in the United States of America in Washington, D.C. Of course, representing a man that means forgiveness to the world, a man that has embodied the sense of humanity. How do you feel today with this event?
I think a small mixture of relief and a great dose of excitement. I think this is a wonderful gift that South Africa is able to give to the people of the United States in return for their unstinting sacrifices on our behalf. I think it's as much a tribute to Nelson Mandela that we unveil his statue as it is to the millions of Americans, some of whom marched here, were arrested here, boycotted for us and sacrificed for us. So this is a wonderful day.
It's a great honor to be part of this occasion, to see a place which once we used to march in front of, trying to get democracy, fighting against the apartheid system, and then one of the heroes of that struggle is here in the body, in the image of the statue of Nelson Mandela. So it's really a testament to all the work that especially Mandela did. He was the hardest working leader for freedom and justice, and it's great that the statue is being installed in his lifetime. That we're doing it not when after he passes, that we're doing it in his lifetime. That's great too, because sometimes we tend to not honor the people who do the good things when they're living. We only remember them after the fact, and it's great that with this statue is here, and also it's great because it also connects the people of South Africa and the people of the USA and worldwide, because this was a movement. It was a South African-led movement. The South African people led us. They led out all the people in the world, but we were in solidarity with them. So it's a great testament.
Mr. Randall Robinson, how do you feel today?
Well, I feel very good. Beyond hopeful, we have prevailed. We set out to do what we could to help those struggling in South Africa to make a democracy of that society. And I think working together revealed and produced a result that is good for all of us. And to see Nelson Mandela celebrated now globally as a man of freedom and democratic ideals and thought, it demonstrates that all of the work that was done by thousands, if not millions across the world, has been very worthwhile.
Right. Have you been to Africa yet?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what do you think this statue means?
I think it means, I think it represents freedom and the right to speak, to act against what we want.
Based on what you have heard of Nelson Mandela, there is something that you have learned from him?
I think I learned that you actually have a lot of power, because he started out in a village and now he's world famous, and also he has a lot of power because self-will, because he stayed in prison for 28 years without going insane.
How do you feel today?
Oh, I'm so happy today. Finally, this is happening. I'm so happy.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Papa. Thank you.
Now, for you, someone who actually lived that
Yeah.
in the meat, you felt the struggle, you lived the struggle. Today is basically a day of liberation. And to you and to the rest of South Africa, how do you think they all feel?
You know, we are so happy, we are so proud, and we're saying, long live Mandela, long live, because we wouldn't be here if it wasn't because of him and the struggle that we went through. Thank you, all the South Africans.
So, about your outfit, could you tell us exactly what if there is any special meaning or anything to it? You look very beautiful, by the way.
Thank you. This is a Xhosa outfit because our dad, Nelson Mandela, he's from the Xhosa tribe. So we said, let us wear the Xhosa outfit so that we can show that he's a Xhosa man.
Thank you very much, man.
Thank you.
Very beautiful.
We dreamed that we'd really see Mandela's statue here, and it brings me such great joy to see it come to this. You seldom see a beginning like Mandela's become an end like his statue.
All right, and we are back. Thank you for joining us again. Now we're going to discuss a little bit about the clips that we've just seen. What did you guys think?
Gorgeous. I mean, it's just the vibe and the joy and the celebration was fantastic, wasn't it?
I think it was just great how people was, cheering on for this. It's not even Mandela that was there, but the statue, you know, to welcome him and like to embrace, what he did.
Now, Sitinga, how monumental is that for history?
I think it's very monumental for history because the United States, during the time that they had sanctions, that was a time when there were still businesses from the United States which were doing business in South Africa. And because of the movement by some of the people we saw in the clip, they sparked the movement here in the United States for the apartheid, for sanctions and divestment, for apartheid to end.
And one of the most amazing things is that honestly, there's one guy that also was interviewed, Mwinza Munthali. That guy basically grew up working in that movement, and that was amazing. It's just great and definitely wonderful. I mean, great interviews, great people. I love the energy. I don't think I've ever been to a place where there was so much positive energy for.
And his daughter was here as well.
Yes,
to talk about him.
Yes. Her interview was great. She actually couldn't talk to us for too long, but she did give us a few words, which was kind of great. That's the closest I'll probably ever get to a Mandela.
But it's also, I think, it's very good to see how all these people, helped fight from this end. I think that's great.
Exactly.
Good to see Eleanor Holmes Norton there. I think she definitely is a voice for the community and a part of the struggle here.
A big voice. And thank you for joining us this week. We hope to see you again next week for the second part of this series on Nelson Mandela. Until then, I am Ingles.
Ndine Thoko Kachipande, Yendani Bwino.
Ek Gaynor Khan, tot de volgende keer. Tot ziens.
And of course, thank you to our guest, Sitinga Kachipande, for joining us today. Till next time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
This program was made possible by Southern African Community USA, SACU, T&T Design Studio, Freelance Graphic Design, www.facebook.com/T&T Design Studio, Cheza Dance, www.facebook.com/Cheza Dance.